We like to think that our choices are obvious, that they announce themselves clearly, like a signpost on a long road. We believe that decisions are conscious acts, deliberate moments where we weigh our options and select a path with full awareness. But what if the most important choices of our lives happen differently? What if they happen beneath the surface of our consciousness, in moments so small we don't even recognize them as choices at all, until years later, when we trace our lives backward and discover that everything pivoted on a decision we never knew we were making? This is the story of an invisible choice. A choice made without awareness, without intention, and without understanding that in that single moment, a life's direction was being set. Her name was Sophia. 34 years old, an architect working for a firm that designed corporate headquarters and commercial complexes. These were functional buildings, efficient spaces, nothing remarkable. Nothing that would be photographed or featured or remembered. Just structures that served a purpose and generated a profit. In school, she dreamed of creating spaces that moved people, that changed how they experienced the world, that mattered beyond their function. But those dreams felt impractical. They required risks she couldn't afford, a financial struggle for projects that might never materialize. So she chose practicality. She chose stability. She chose to design buildings she didn't care about for clients who valued efficiency over inspiration. It was fine. It paid the bills. It was what adults did. They compromised, accepted reality, and slowly buried their dreams under a foundation of practical choices. Her life mirrored the buildings she designed. She lived alone in a small, sparsely decorated apartment near her office. It was a functional space where she slept and ate. Efficient, practical, and empty of anything that mattered beyond pure utility. She didn't even wear perfume. Scent was frivolous, a decoration rather than a function, exactly the kind of unnecessary details she'd learned to eliminate from her life. One day, she had a routine presentation. A new client, a 20-story office building. Standard requirements: maximize rentable space, minimize construction costs, deliver a functional design that met code and budget. Nothing special. Exactly the kind of project that filled her days and emptied her nights of meaning. She prepared her presentation carefully, with several functional, practical options. The client would choose, she'd refine the design, and the routine would continue. But on the morning of the presentation, she was running late. Her usual suit was at the cleaners. She had to find something else. From the back of her closet, she pulled a dress she'd bought years ago and never worn. It was too distinctive, too memorable, too much like the person she'd been before she learned to be practical. She dressed quickly, grabbed her materials, and was heading out the door when she noticed a small vial of perfume on her dresser. She didn't remember buying it. It was probably a sample. She would normally never use it, because it wasn't practical, wasn't necessary. But she was already breaking her routine, already wearing a dress she never wore, already late. So, without thinking, without making a conscious choice, she applied a little. It was just a small, almost unnoticeable act. The scent was subtle, barely there. It smelled like possibility, like the space between what is and what could be. She went to the presentation, still focused on her practical designs, still planning to deliver exactly what the client expected. But when she began to speak, something shifted. The words coming out of her mouth weren't the ones she'd prepared. She found herself talking about how buildings shape human experience, how design choices affect how people feel, how they could create a space that was both functional and meaningful. She heard herself proposing a different design entirely, one she'd sketched late one night and then hidden away because it was impractical, risky, and prioritized experience over efficiency. The room went quiet. Her colleagues looked uncomfortable. Her manager shifted in his seat. She had broken protocol. Then, the client's CEO leaned forward. "Show me that design," he said. "The one you just described. I want to see it." Sophia pulled it from her portfolio. The sketch she'd created for herself, for the architect she used to be, for the dreams she had buried. She spread it on the table. The CEO studied it, then looked at her. "This is what I actually want," he said. "I've seen 100 efficient, forgettable designs. This is different. This matters. Can you deliver this?" Sophia should have said no. She should have explained that her firm didn't do risky designs. Her manager was already signaling his disapproval. But wearing that dress, carrying that scent, in a morning that had already broken the routine, she said yes, without consulting her manager, without calculating the risks. She just said yes, because it was the only answer that felt true. The project went forward, but not smoothly. Her manager was furious. He said she'd overstepped, that the design was too complex and would go over budget. But the client's CEO insisted. He said this was why he'd hired her. He had responded to something invisible in her presentation, something she was conveying without even knowing it. Sophia worked on that building obsessively. She fought for every detail, refusing to compromise on the elements that mattered, even when contractors and her manager told her to be practical. That scent, that moment, had changed something in her. Compromise now felt like betrayal. Practicality felt like the slow death of everything important. The building took 2 years. It went over budget and over schedule. But when it was finished, it was remarkable. It was photographed, featured in magazines, and written about. It was exactly what she had dreamed of creating. The client's CEO was thrilled and offered her his next project, with a bigger budget and more creative freedom. Her firm was conflicted. The project had brought them great publicity, but she had violated every rule. They offered her a partnership, but with conditions. She would continue to design their standard, practical projects and save her vision for special clients. She would have to compromise, be practical. She declined. She left the firm and started her own practice. It was smaller, riskier, with no guaranteed income. It was terrifying. She had no clients, no safety net, just a portfolio with one remarkable building and a belief that spaces could matter. But the work came, slowly but surely. People who had seen her building, who wanted spaces that mattered, who were willing to pay for vision, for risk, for possibility. Her practice grew, never becoming large or stable, but it became hers. It became meaningful. 5 years after that fateful presentation, she tried to find the vial of perfume, the scent she'd applied that morning, the one that was there when everything changed. But she couldn't find it. She couldn't remember where it came from or what it was. She just remembered that it smelled like permission to choose differently. She understood then that the scent hadn't created the choice. It hadn't forced her to present the risky design or say yes. It was just there in the moment. The choice was being made. When her practical routine was disrupted just enough to let another option emerge, the invisible choice that mattered hadn't felt like a choice at all. It felt like an accident running late, wearing the wrong dress, applying a random scent. But in that moment, the entire trajectory of her life pivoted. From practical efficiency toward meaningful risk. From a life she'd been taught to want toward the life she actually wanted. And she'd made that choice without even knowing she was choosing. She thinks about that often now. About how many invisible choices she'd made before that morning. How many times she'd chosen the practical path without even realizing it was a choice. And she wonders how many invisible choices she's still making every day. That experience taught her something permanent. Choices don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they happen in moments so small you don't recognize their significance until you look back and realize everything pivoted right there. In that invisible moment, that unnoticed choice, the decision you never knew you were making. She lives with that awareness now, paying attention to the small moments, the disruptions to routine, the times when she is choosing without recognizing she's choosing, because she understands now that the most important choices are often the invisible ones. The ones that happen in moments that feel like nothing until they become everything. Thanks so much for watching. What invisible choices might have shaped your life? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this.